I felt my heart tear itself apart at midnight, and when I reached for the door, my own family had locked me out. The pain came suddenly, sharp as a knife twisting in my chest, stealing the breath from my lungs. My knees buckled, and the world tilted in slow motion. I staggered against the wooden door frame, my palm pressed flat against the cold surface, pounding weakly, begging for someone, anyone to open. Inside, I heard whispers, a woman's voice, steady and cold. My daughter-in-law, Melissa. "Leave him, he'll calm down." Calm down. I was dying on her doorstep. My own son David said nothing, just silence thick as betrayal. The porch light flickered above me, casting long shadows that danced across the yard. The wind cut into my face, and the night air burned my throat as I gasped for oxygen. I remember sliding down the door, my cheeks scraping the rough wood, the taste of salt from rain mixing with the tears I didn't even realize I was shedding. My fists tapped against the locked door one last time before my body betrayed me completely. Every breath felt like it might be the last, and in that moment, what hurt more than the failing heart in my chest was the thought that my own blood had decided I wasn't worth saving. I had given them everything. I built that house when David was still a boy, hammering nails with hands that already ached from years of factory shifts. Melissa married into our family with her perfect smile and sharper words, but I never imagined she'd be the one to push me out. Not into the street, but into the silence between life and death. I thought of my late wife, Margaret, how she would have screamed the house down rather than leave me lying outside like an old dog. But Margaret was gone, and so was the warmth of this family I thought I still had. The night blurred. My vision clouded until all I saw were fragments, the glow of a street lamp, the distant hum of a car, the mocking warmth of the home I had provided yet no longer belonged to. The sound that broke the darkness wasn't the door unlocking, wasn't my son's voice. It was a neighbor's gasp. Mrs. Carter from 2 houses down saw me crumpled on the porch, her voice cracking as she shouted for help. She was the one who called the ambulance. Strangers in uniforms carried me away, while the people inside the house I built never stepped outside to check if I was still breathing. I remember the siren wailing, the red lights reflecting off the windows I had once cleaned with pride, and I swore to myself as my body gave in to the machines. If I survived, I would never forget this night. Because sometimes death isn't what breaks you, it's the door your own family locks against you. And that door was only the beginning of what I was about to uncover next. When I opened my eyes in the hospital, I thought I had crossed over, because nothing felt real. The lights above me glared like cold suns, and the steady beep of the heart monitor reminded me with cruel rhythm that I was still here, alive but hollow. Tubes ran into my arm, a mask pressed against my face, and the first face I searched for was my son's. He wasn't there. Neither was Melissa. The only visitor was absence itself, heavier than any pain in my chest. A nurse named Evelyn touched my hand gently, her voice soft, as if she already knew my story without me telling it. "You're lucky," she said. "Another 5 minutes, and your heart might not have made it." Lucky. That word tasted bitter. How could I be lucky when the people who should have been by my side had locked me away like garbage left on the curb? I thanked her anyway, because kindness from a stranger was more than what I received from my own family that night. As the hours passed, memories flooded me like waves. I thought of the times I carried David on my shoulders to the park, how he laughed when I pretended to stumble, how proud I was when he scored his first goal in Little League. I remembered the nights I worked double shifts at the plant, grease still clinging to my clothes, just so he could have new sneakers when the old ones wore thin. Every sacrifice I made, every dream I buried. I did so believing my son would grow into a man who would stand by me when the years bent my back and slowed my steps. But the silence in that hospital room told me I had raised a stranger. The doctor came in, tall man with tired eyes, introducing himself as Dr. Harris. He laid it out bluntly. My heart was weak, fragile, and though the worst had passed, I couldn't ignore it anymore. You need rest, medication, a safer environment. His words carried weight. But what pierced me was that he glanced at the empty chair beside my bed, as if to say, "Where is your family?" I had no answer. My throat tightened, but I refused to let tears fall in front of him. Pride is the only shield an old man has left when respect has been stripped away. That night, lying under stiff hospital sheets, I replayed the sound of the locked door again and again. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't confusion. It was a choice. Melissa's voice rang sharp in my head, telling David to leave me outside, and his silence spoke louder than any words could. My son had chosen comfort over conscience, and in that silence, I finally understood. What nearly killed me wasn't just a failing heart. It was the betrayal of my own blood. I closed my eyes, not to rest, but to make a promise. If life had given me one more chance, I would not waste it by returning to the same doorstep. Because sometimes survival isn't about the body. It's about reclaiming the dignity others tried to lock away. And when I walked out of that hospital, I knew exactly where I was going first. The day I was discharged, the air outside felt different. It wasn't just spring air brushing my face. It was freedom, bitter and fragile. Evelyn, the nurse who had looked after me, helped me into the cab. She smiled warmly, but her eyes carried the heaviness of someone who knew I had nowhere to return to. "Do you have someone picking you up?" she asked gently. I nodded, though the truth burned inside me. The people who should have been there had turned their backs. I wasn't going back to that house, not after what happened on that porch. The cab driver, an older man named Thomas, struck up small talk, but I barely heard him. My thoughts were stuck on the sound of Melissa's voice and David's silence. Each mile away from the hospital felt like peeling away the last layer of denial. They had left me to die. That's not a misunderstanding, it's intent. I tightened my hand over my chest, not from pain, but from anger I hadn't allowed myself to feel until then. Instead of giving the driver my son's address, I asked to be taken across town to a building most people had forgotten existed. A modest apartment tucked above an old hardware store, where I had quietly paid rent for years. Margaret had called it paranoia when I signed the lease decades ago. But to me, it was a backup plan, a place no one else knew about. I never thought I'd actually need it. That day, it became my sanctuary. Unlocking the door, I stepped inside to the faint smell of dust and old paint. The furniture was outdated, the curtains yellowed by time, but it was mine. My chest loosened for the first time in days. I brewed a pot of coffee with the old drip machine, sat in the recliner, and stared at the wall where a faded calendar still hung. In that silence, I realized I wasn't just recovering from a heart attack. I was recovering from a lifetime of blindness. I had ignored the small cruelties, the whispers, the slammed doors, believing family meant forgiveness. But forgiveness without respect is nothing but surrender. As the sun set outside the window, I pulled out the drawer of the side table. Inside was a sealed envelope, edges worn from years of moving it around. My living will, my property deeds, bank information. Melissa didn't even know existed. I had prepared for the day age might make me vulnerable, but I hadn't prepared for betrayal from my own blood. Now, that envelope wasn't just paper, it was my weapon. They thought I was powerless, dependent, an old man with nothing left but memories. They were wrong. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, hearing Margaret's voice in my head, steady and kind. "Don't let them take what you've built." She was gone, but her words remained, as strong as the bricks I once stacked with these same hands. And as the night deepened, I knew this was only the beginning of the fight they never expected me to start. I didn't sleep that night. The hum of the old refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock were the only sounds keeping me company in that forgotten apartment. My body was weak, but my mind refused to rest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the door, felt the cold wood against my cheek, heard Melissa's voice telling David to leave me outside. I wondered if he hesitated, if his hand hovered near the lock, if his heart whispered, "Open it." But the lock never turned. That silence was his answer. By morning, determination replaced exhaustion. I showered slowly, shaved the gray stubble from my face, and dressed in my cleanest shirt. It wasn't vanity. It was armor. An old man in a wrinkled shirt looks weak, forgotten. But an old man who walks upright, dressed with care, reminds the world that he is still standing. I looked at myself in the mirror and whispered, "You're not done yet." The first place I went wasn't back to that house. It was the bank. Robert, the branch manager, had known me for years. His handshake was firm, his eyes full of respect, something I hadn't felt in my own home for a long time. I asked him to sit with me privately. I pulled out the envelope, spreading the documents across his desk. He listened as I explained what had happened, my voice steady though my hands trembled. Robert didn't look at me with pity. He looked at me with gravity. "We'll secure everything," he said. "No one will move a cent without your say-so." For the first time since the night of my collapse, I felt safe. From there, I went straight to the notary. The clerk raised an eyebrow when I told her I wanted to revoke all powers of attorney, update my will, and place protections on my property. She asked if there was a rush. I met her gaze and said, "You could say my life depends on it." She didn't ask further questions, just stamped each page with firm hands. Watching her seal those papers felt like hammering nails into the coffin of their schemes. My son and his wife thought they had me cornered. Instead, they had awakened a side of me I had almost forgotten, a man who knew how to fight with pen and paper. Walking back through the streets, documents tucked under my arm, I noticed something strange. The city looked brighter. Not because the world had changed, but because I had. I wasn't the broken figure left gasping on a porch. I was alive, and more than that, I was ready. Ready to face them. Ready to confront the truth that had been festering behind that locked door. And though my heart was still fragile, I felt something beating inside me that was stronger than fear. Resolve. What came next would test me more than any illness ever could. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. 2 days after I secured my accounts and updated my will, there was a knock on the door of my small apartment. I knew who it was before I even opened it. Through the thin wood I heard David's voice, hesitant, soft, almost rehearsed. "Dad, it's me. We need to talk." My chest tightened, not from pain this time, but from the storm rising inside me. I opened the door, and there he stood, hair uncombed, eyes tired, shoulders slumped as if carrying the weight of shame. But shame is only heavy when it's real. His silence the night I was dying proved otherwise. He stepped inside uninvited, glancing around the modest apartment he never knew existed. "You should have told me you were here," he muttered, as if this secret room was an offense to him. I said nothing. I wanted him to be the first to break the silence that had nearly killed me. Finally, he whispered, "Melissa didn't mean it that way. She panicked. We didn't know what to do." My hands clenched. "You didn't know what to do when your father was dying on your doorstep?" My voice was calm, but each word landed heavy, like stones in the room between us. He looked down, fumbling with his wedding band, twisting it around his finger. "She thought, maybe you were exaggerating. You've had chest pains before." His excuses were thin, like smoke vanishing before they could even form. I leaned closer, my eyes locked on his. "David, you heard me pounding. You heard me gasping for air. And you let her lock me out." His lips trembled, but no words came. There it was again, that same silence, heavier now, because this time he couldn't hide behind a door. Melissa's name kept slipping from his mouth, as if she alone had turned the key. But I knew better. A son's duty isn't measured by the courage of his wife. It's measured by his own. And that night, He failed. I told him about the bank, the notary, the protections I'd put in place. His face drained of color. He realized the man he thought was powerless still held the pen, the papers, and the final say. "Dad, don't do this," he whispered. "We're family." I almost laughed. Family? Family doesn't leave you to die at midnight. Family doesn't bolt the door and whisper until the knocking stops. I stood tall, though my chest ached from the effort. You and Melissa made your choice, and I've made mine. The house, the money, the future. It no longer belongs to you. His eyes filled with panic, not love, not regret. Panic at losing what he thought was already his. I opened the door wide, this time not locked, but firm in my control. "Leave, David," I said. "And when you tell her, remind Melissa that the old man she left outside is still standing." He walked out without another word. But his silence this time wasn't power. It was fear. And I knew it was only the beginning of a battle that would shake the very walls they tried to keep me from. After David left my apartment, the silence he left behind was different. It wasn't the heavy silence of betrayal anymore. It was the silence before a storm. I sat in the old recliner, documents stacked neatly on the table beside me, and thought about how far I had come in only a few days. From lying helpless on the porch at midnight, to standing tall with every paper secured in my name. But battles with family never end with one confrontation. They simmer, waiting for the next strike. It came in the form of a letter slid under my door the following evening. The handwriting was sharp, controlled, not David's, Melissa. I unfolded the paper slowly, already knowing it wouldn't be an apology. My guess was right. "You've embarrassed David," she wrote. "You've made him believe you don't trust us. You're letting outsiders fill your head. We only wanted what was best for you. If you continue this way, you'll isolate yourself completely. Think carefully before you ruin what family you have left." No signature, just her name scribbled at the bottom like a warning. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the audacity. She wasn't ashamed of what she'd done. She was angry because I had survived. I folded the letter, slid it into the drawer with my will, and whispered to the empty room. "Melissa, you locked me out once, but you will never lock me out of my own life again." For the first time, I felt the fire of resolve burn hotter than the pain in my chest. They thought survival had made me weaker. They didn't understand that survival had made me stronger. 2 days later, I met with my lawyer, a steady woman named Clara, who carried herself with the authority of someone who had seen too many families fall apart over greed. I told her everything, from the midnight collapse to the letter Melissa sent. Clara leaned back in her chair, her eyes sharp. "This isn't just neglect," she said. "It borders on abuse, and if they try to contest anything, you have every right to defend yourself with the truth." Her words steadied me like a hand on my shoulder. For the first time, I wasn't just a father grieving betrayal. I was a man preparing for justice. Walking back to my apartment, I passed by a park where children played, their laughter filling the air. One boy ran to his grandfather, throwing his arms around the man's waist. I froze, my chest tightening, not from pain, but from longing. I thought of the days David used to run to me like that, his tiny hands clutching my shirt, his voice calling me his hero. Somewhere between those days and now, I had lost him. Or maybe he had lost himself. As I sat on the bench watching the sunset bleed into the horizon, I knew this wasn't just about property or money. This was about dignity. And dignity, once taken, must be fought for. The next move wouldn't be theirs, it would be mine. I woke the next morning with the letter from Melissa still heavy in my mind. Her words lingered like poison, but instead of breaking me, they sharpened my resolve. I brewed my coffee slowly, the bitter steam rising into the quiet room, and stared at the envelope where I had tucked her threat away. That drawer now held every reminder of betrayal, the will, the deeds, and now her letter. It wasn't just paperwork. It was a map of war. And war was what they had chosen when they locked me out at midnight. Later that day, I walked into Clara's office again. She studied me with the careful eyes of someone who measures not just words, but the weight behind them. "They'll push back," she warned. "People like Melissa don't let go quietly. She'll try to twist your silence into weakness." I nodded, though deep down I knew she was right. Silence had always been my way of keeping peace, but silence had nearly killed me. This time, silence would become my weapon, not my surrender. Clara slid a folder across her desk. "These are preemptive protections, court-recognized. If they try to contest your capacity, these will prove you're lucid, competent, and in control of every decision." I opened the folder, reading words I had never thought I'd need. Elder abuse, neglect, attempted undue influence. Each term was like a mirror reflecting the truth I had refused to see. My own son, my own daughter-in-law, they weren't just careless. They were willing to erase me if it meant inheriting sooner. On the way back, I stopped at a diner I hadn't visited in years. The waitress, an older woman named Joyce, recognized me. "Haven't seen you in ages, mister," she said with a smile. I managed a small nod. "Life got complicated." She poured my coffee and added, "Complicated or not, you're still here. That counts for something." Simple words, but they struck deep. Sometimes it takes strangers to remind you that survival itself is proof of worth. That evening, as the sun bled gold through my apartment window, I pulled out an old notebook. Margaret had given it to me once, saying, "Write your thoughts, so they don't eat you alive." I opened to a blank page and began to write every detail of the night my heart failed. The locked door, Melissa's voice, David's silence, the rain soaking through my shirt as my breaths grew shallow. Writing it down wasn't just memory. It was testimony. If I ever had to face them in court, or if one day my grandchildren asked what really happened, this notebook would speak when I was no longer able. When I finally closed it, the room felt heavier but also clearer. The truth was no longer trapped in my chest. It was on paper, undeniable, unchangeable. I placed the notebook beside the drawer with the documents and whispered to myself, "Now they can't rewrite my story." But as I lay down to rest, a question gnawed at me. If they were bold enough to lock me out once, what would they dare to do next? The answer came faster than I expected. 2 nights later, just as I was finishing dinner in my apartment, there was a loud knock at the door. It wasn't David's hesitant tapping this time. It was forceful, demanding. My heart tightened, but not from illness. I steadied myself, opened the door, and there stood Melissa. Her arms crossed, eyes sharp as blades. David lingered behind her, his face pale, his hands shoved deep into his pockets like a guilty child. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You can't keep doing this," she snapped, her voice echoing in the narrow hallway. "You're turning David against his own family. You're letting outsiders control you." I stepped aside, letting them in, because if this confrontation was coming, I wanted it inside these walls. My walls, not theirs. Melissa looked around with a sneer, as if the modest furniture and old curtains confirmed the story she told herself, that I was a weak old man clinging to scraps. But she didn't see the stack of documents on the table, waiting like loaded weapons. "You locked me out while I was dying," I said quietly, my eyes fixed on David. He flinched but said nothing. Melissa's lips tightened. "We panicked. You've been fragile for years, always complaining about your chest. We thought you were overreacting." I slammed my hand on the table, the sound reverberating through the room. "Fragile? You call gasping for air at midnight fragile? You call leaving me to die overreacting?" My voice cracked, not from weakness, but from fury that had been silent too long. David finally spoke, his voice low. "Dad, please, we made a mistake. Melissa didn't mean—" "Don't hide behind her," I interrupted. "You were there. You heard me. You stayed silent. That silence almost buried me. His eyes dropped to the floor, his shoulders sagging under the truth he couldn't deny. Melissa, though, stood straighter, her chin lifted like a soldier refusing to retreat. "We were protecting our family," she said. "You don't understand what it's like for us. Keeping this house running, raising the kids, managing everything while you sit in your chair. We needed control. We needed stability." Her words cut, not because they were true, but because of the contempt dripping from them. "Stability?" I said, leaning closer. "You don't build stability by locking the man who built your house out of it. You don't build family by bolting the door against the very blood that gave you shelter." I opened the drawer slowly, pulled out the folder, and laid it flat on the table. Deeds, wills, notarized signatures, all proof that their imagined control was nothing but smoke. Melissa's eyes widened as she realized what she was staring at. David's face drained of color again. "I'm not powerless," I said, my voice steady. "And I'm not yours to control. Every roof you live under, every dollar you hope to inherit, it is mine, and I decide where it goes." The room fell silent, the weight of truth pressing harder than any scream. Melissa's hands trembled, just for a second, before she tightened her jaw and tried to recover. But the damage was done. She now knew the fight wasn't hers to win with whispers and locks. As they left my apartment, I saw something new in David's eyes, not just guilt, but fear. And I wondered, as the door clicked shut, how far Melissa would push him before the next betrayal surfaced. The morning after their visit, I found myself staring at the folder on my table, replaying every word Melissa had spit out the night before. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't even ashamed. Her anger came not from guilt, but from realizing the control she thought she had was slipping away. And David, my son, stood beside her like a shadow, too afraid to speak, too afraid to stand with me. That silence hurt more than her words. A wife can poison a house, but a son's silence is what kills it. I decided I wouldn't wait for their next move. I called Clara, my lawyer, and told her everything. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she sighed. The kind of sigh that carries both empathy and readiness. "We'll strengthen the protections," she said. "If Melissa is bold enough to confront you directly, the next step could be legal maneuvering. We'll make sure they have nothing to twist." Her confidence steadied me, but it also confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. That afternoon, I walked to the post office. The air was brisk, sharp against my face, but it reminded me I was still alive, still able to put one foot in front of the other. I mailed a copy of the updated documents to a trusted old friend, Paul, a retired notary I'd known for decades. "If anything happens to me," I told him on the phone later, "these papers will speak for me." He promised he'd keep them safe, and I believed him. Trust, once broken in your own family, becomes a treasure when found elsewhere. Back at the apartment, I sat at my desk and opened the notebook again. This time I wrote about the confrontation, every word, every expression, the way Melissa's eyes flickered when she saw the deeds, the way David's shoulders slumped under the weight of truth. Writing it all down wasn't just therapy. It was record. One day, when I'm gone, my grandchildren will read these pages and know exactly what happened, without Melissa's lies clouding their minds. They'll know their grandfather fought not for revenge, but for dignity. As the sun dipped low, I stood by the window watching people head home from work. Couples laughing, children tugging on parents' hands, families living the simple life I once believed I had. I pressed my hand against the cold glass and whispered to Margaret, wherever she might be, "I'm still standing. They didn't finish me." And in that whisper, I felt a strength rise again, not the strength of muscle, but the strength of a man who refuses to be erased. But later that night, as I brewed another pot of coffee, the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something in my gut told me to answer. A man's voice, low and uneasy, spoke on the other end. "Mr. Harris, you don't know me, but you need to hear this. Melissa has been making plans. She's not finished." I gripped the phone tighter, my chest tightening. Not from illness this time, but from the weight of the storm about to break. The voice on the line introduced himself as Daniel, a clerk who worked at the county records office. His tone carried the kind of nervous respect of someone stepping into dangerous territory. "Your daughter-in-law has been coming here, asking about property transfers," he said. "She's been trying to see if there's a way to move your house into her name through David. She doesn't know I'm calling you, but I couldn't watch it happen without warning you." For a moment, I sat frozen. The phone pressed to my ear, my pulse loud as a drum. I had suspected Melissa's ambition was more than words, but hearing it confirmed by a stranger made the truth slam into me all over again. She wasn't done. She wasn't satisfied with leaving me to die at the door. She wanted to erase me entirely, down to the very roof over my head. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice low, careful. Daniel paused, then said, "Because I saw my own grandfather lose everything when my aunt forged papers. He never recovered. You remind me of him. I don't want to see it happen again." His words cracked something inside me, an ache not just for myself, but for every elder pushed aside when they're no longer convenient. I thanked him, promised his name would stay between us, and hung up. That night I paced the apartment, the documents laid out across the table like a battlefield map. Melissa's tactics were clearer now. She wasn't just manipulating David. She was laying groundwork, preparing to strike through paperwork, through signatures and lies. My chest ached, but it wasn't weakness. It was fury. If she thought I was an easy man to bury under forged papers, she had underestimated me for the last time. The next morning I met Clara again, sliding Daniel's warning across her desk like contraband. Her jaw tightened as she read. "This isn't surprising," she said, "but it's dangerous. If she's bold enough to try this, she'll stop at nothing." Clara drafted an emergency filing, placing additional blocks on my property. No transfer, no modification. No sale could be attempted without my physical presence, signature, and identification. "This," she said firmly, "makes her schemes worthless." I nodded. But deep down, I knew Melissa wasn't the type to give up when cornered. She would push harder, and when she pushed, David would be standing right beside her. Walking home, I passed by the church where Margaret and I once lit candles for David when he was just a boy. I stepped inside, not out of piety, but out of memory. The silence of that place reminded me of promises made long ago, to raise him with honesty, to protect him, to give him a name worth carrying. I had kept my promise. He had broken his. As I lit a candle for Margaret, I whispered, "They'll try again. But this time, I'll be ready." And even as the flame flickered, I knew the next move Melissa made would not be in whispers at the records office. It would come to my door, and it would come with force. It was just 3 days later when her force arrived, not in the dead of night this time, but in broad daylight, bold and unapologetic. A sharp knock rattled the door of my apartment. I opened it slowly, and there stood Melissa, dressed as though she were walking into a boardroom. Black blazer, crisp hair pinned back, eyes hard enough to cut glass. David was behind her again, his face pale, his voice absent. He looked like a man dragged by a leash. She didn't wait for an invitation. She pushed past me, heels clicking on the worn floorboards, and laid a folder on my table. "We're done playing games," she said. "David is his father's son, and he has a right to this family's assets. You're not thinking clearly. These papers prove it." I sat down across from her, my fingers steady even as my chest throbbed with the faint reminder of what midnight had done to me. I opened the folder. Inside were documents filled with legal jargon, petitions, evaluations, requests for guardianship. At the top of one page, highlighted in yellow, was a single word that almost made me laugh out loud. Incompetent. Melissa folded her arms. "It's not personal. It's necessary. You're not capable of making these decisions anymore. The court will see that. And once they do, David will be named guardian. We'll handle everything. You'll be cared for." She said the word cared with the same sharpness she had used the night she locked me out. Care wasn't in her heart. Control was. David stared at the floor. His silence was louder than her threats. For a moment, I studied him, searching for even a flicker of the boy who once ran to me with scraped knees and tearful eyes, begging me to make the pain stop. But that boy was buried under Melissa's ambition, buried so deep I wondered if he'd ever resurface. I reached into the drawer beside me and laid my own folder on top of hers. Deeds, wills, notarized protections, all stamped, sealed, and unshakable. "Melissa," I said calmly, "if you think I'm incompetent, then you've already lost, because an incompetent man wouldn't have seen this coming. He wouldn't have locked down every account, every property, every right with iron chains you'll never break." Her jaw tightened, the first crack in her polished armor. "You can't fight us forever," she snapped. "You're old, and sooner or later, time will do the work for me." I leaned closer, my voice steady, eyes fixed on hers. "Maybe. But when that day comes, it won't be you holding the keys. It will be the ones who still remember what family means." I tapped the notebook on the table, the one where I had recorded every betrayal, every silence, every locked door. "And when the truth comes out, your children will know exactly who locked me out at midnight." For the first time, Melissa faltered. Her hands trembled as she gathered her folder, her words caught between anger and fear. She turned to leave, dragging David with her, but I knew this wasn't retreat. It was regrouping. When the door closed, I sat in the quiet, my chest heavy, my pulse quick. Midnight had nearly taken me once. But I understood something now. Midnight would come again, only this time, I would be waiting. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I sat in the recliner with the documents still spread across the table, the lamp throwing long shadows across the walls. Midnight has a way of making the world feel heavier, as if silence itself is conspiring against you. My heart thumped slower than it should, but stronger than Melissa ever wanted it to. I kept hearing her words on repeat. "You're old. Time will do the work for me." She thought death was her ally. She thought patience would hand her everything I had built. She didn't know that survival itself was now my rebellion. The following morning, Clara called. Her tone was sharp, businesslike, but I caught the current of anger beneath it. "They've already filed," she said. "Melissa petitioned the court claiming you're mentally unfit, and David's name is listed as proposed guardian." My jaw tightened. "How fast can we respond?" Clara didn't hesitate. "Immediately, but Bernard," she used my name carefully, "I need you to understand this will get ugly. They'll use every moment of weakness against you, even the night of your collapse." I told her to prepare everything. If Melissa wanted a war of paper and words, I'd meet her on that battlefield. I wasn't afraid of ugly. I'd lived through ugly all my life. Dirty hands from factory floors, nights of sweat and sacrifice, the loneliness of raising a son who would later turn his back. Ugly doesn't scare a man who's built his whole life out of it. Later that day, I received an unexpected knock. Not Melissa, not David. It was my neighbor, Mrs. Carter, the same woman who had found me collapsed on the porch that night. She stepped inside, her eyes kind but determined. "I heard rumors," she said. "I heard Melissa's been telling people you've lost your mind, that you're confused, unstable." She reached for my hand. "But I know what I saw. I saw a man fighting to breathe while his own family stayed inside." Her words struck me harder than any legal petition, because when the time came, it wouldn't just be my papers or Clara's sharp tongue that saved me. It would be witnesses like Mrs. Carter, proof not on ink, but in memory. I thanked her, promised her voice would be heard when the truth was tested. She squeezed my hand, eyes shining with the kind of loyalty Melissa would never understand. That evening, I added another page to my notebook. I wrote about the visit from Mrs. Carter, about Clara's warning, about Melissa's arrogance. And at the bottom, I wrote a single line in bold letters. If midnight comes again, I will not be alone. I closed the book, placed it back on the stack of documents, and leaned back in my chair. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself a small smile. Because Melissa thought she had shut me out, but in reality, she had opened every door I needed. Neighbors, witnesses, the law itself. Still, as the clock struck 12 and the city outside grew quiet, I couldn't help but wonder, when we finally faced each other in court, what would David choose, his wife's voice or his father's truth? The day of the hearing arrived faster than I imagined. Clara had warned me that Melissa would move quickly, and she was right. 1 week after her visit to my apartment, I found myself walking up the cold marble steps of the courthouse. My legs trembled with each step, not only from age, but from the weight of what was about to unfold. Yet my spine stayed straight. I wasn't walking in there as a frail old man. They would see me as a father, betrayed but unbroken. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood and nerves. Clara met me at the entrance, her folder packed with documents, her face calm but sharp as a blade. "Remember," she whispered, "you don't need to perform. You just need to be you, lucid, steady, honest. The truth will be heavier than their lies." I nodded, though my chest tightened with every beat. This wasn't just a legal fight. It was my life being weighed against Melissa's ambition. When the doors opened, I saw them. Melissa strode in first, heels clicking, lips pressed into that cold smirk she wore like armor. David trailed behind her, eyes down, shoulders slouched, his suit ill-fitting as if even the fabric refused to stand with him. He glanced at me once, then quickly away, as though my presence burned him. That hurt more than I'll ever admit. The judge entered, a stern man with silver hair and a gaze that sliced through excuses. He read the petition aloud. Melissa's claim that I was no longer of sound mind, that I was incapable of handling my affairs, that David should be appointed guardian. Her voice filled the courtroom as she testified, smooth and practiced, painting herself as the concerned daughter-in-law who only wanted to protect me. She spoke of my collapse, my age, my supposed confusion. Every word dripped with false concern. Then it was Clara's turn. She rose with the calm of someone who already knew the outcome. "Your Honor," she began, "the man sitting here today is not confused, not incompetent. He is a survivor of neglect and abuse, locked outside his own home at midnight by the very people claiming to protect him." Gasps whispered through the room. Melissa's face tightened, her hand clenching David's arm. Clara called the first witness, Mrs. Carter. The old neighbor walked with slow but steady steps to the stand. She told the court what she saw. Me collapsed on the porch, gasping for air, while the lights were on inside and no one came out. Her words rang louder than any lawyer's argument. Truth always does. When it was my turn to speak, I stood with my hands gripping the wooden railing, my voice clear though my chest ached. "I may be old, but I am not incompetent. I built my home, I raised my son, I worked for every dollar I ever had. What nearly killed me was not just my heart, it was betrayal. If that night proved anything, it's that the ones who claimed to protect me were willing to watch me die." The courtroom was silent except for the scratching of the judge's pen. When I sat down, Melissa avoided my gaze, but David, just for a flicker of a moment, looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen in years: doubt. The hearing adjourned for the day, but I knew the war was far from over. As I walked out into the fading light, Clara leaned close and whispered, "You shook them. Tomorrow we press harder." And I wondered, as the sun dipped behind the courthouse walls, whether David's silence would hold, or if the truth would finally crack him open. The second day of the hearing carried a tension you could cut with a knife. I barely slept the night before, replaying every word Melissa had spoken. every lie she had crafted with that sweet, poisonous tone. When I stepped back into the courtroom, the air felt colder, heavier, as if the walls themselves were bracing for what was about to be revealed. Clara wasted no time. She called Daniel, the clerk from the county records office, to the stand. He walked nervously, his eyes darting toward Melissa as if he feared retribution. But when he raised his hand and swore to tell the truth, his voice steadied. He testified how Melissa had come to his office, asking questions about transferring property, about loopholes that would allow her to move deeds without my knowledge. He admitted he risked his job by warning me. His words fell like stones in the quiet room. Melissa's face turned rigid, her jaw tight, while David's gaze sank deeper into the table. Clara then placed the documents I had secured, deeds, wills, notarized protections, before the judge. Each page was a shield, each signature proof of foresight they never expected. She spoke with precision. A man who prepares with this level of clarity and care is not incompetent. He is vigilant. When it was Melissa's turn to respond, her mask cracked. She raised her voice, insisting I was being manipulated, that outsiders like Clara and neighbors like Mrs. Carter were filling my head with paranoia. Her tone grew shrill, desperate, no longer the polished woman who had strolled in the day before. And in that unraveling, I saw her fear, the fear of losing control. Then the judge turned to David. "You may speak on your father's behalf." The room went silent. He shifted uncomfortably, his hands clasping and unclasping. He opened his mouth once, then closed it. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, I don't know." Melissa snapped her head toward him, eyes wide, but the words were already hanging in the air. He stumbled on. I thought we were helping him, but seeing all this..." He trailed off, his voice breaking under the weight of truth he couldn't deny. The judge nodded, scribbling notes with deliberate strokes. Melissa's fury burned across her face, but David's silence had broken. For the first time, he hadn't defended her. For the first time, he hadn't stood against me. As the session ended, I walked past them on my way out. Melissa's glare was sharp enough to pierce steel, but David's eyes met mine. They were wet, uncertain, almost pleading. He didn't speak, but he didn't need to. That flicker of doubt I saw on the first day had grown into something heavier. Clara placed a steady hand on my shoulder as we stepped into the light outside. "We're winning," she whispered. But I didn't feel victory, not yet. Because in every battle between blood and betrayal, winning never feels like triumph. It feels like survival. And as I stood on those courthouse steps, I wondered what David's silence would turn into next. Courage or cowardice. The third day of the hearing began with rain tapping against the courthouse windows, a steady rhythm that mirrored the pounding in my chest. I sat at the table with Clara beside me, her presence firm and unshakable, while Melissa and David took their seats across the aisle. Melissa looked furious, her composure fraying at the edges, but David looked worse, drained, pale, a man torn in two. The judge called for final testimonies. Clara stood first, her voice carrying with the calm authority of truth. She reminded the court of Mrs. Carter's account, of Daniel's warning, of the stack of documents I had prepared long before Melissa ever plotted. "This is not the story of an incompetent man," she said firmly. "This is the story of a father betrayed, a man who survived the very neglect his family is now trying to disguise as concern. He does not need guardianship. He needs protection from those who would take advantage of his trust." Her words settled over the courtroom like a heavy blanket, impossible to shake off. Melissa shot up as soon as Clara finished, her voice sharp, her hands trembling as she clutched her papers. She insisted again that I was unstable, that my heart condition proved I couldn't handle the stress of responsibility. She accused Clara of manipulating me, accused neighbors of exaggeration, accused Daniel of lying. Each word rang with desperation. "He is confused," she cried, pointing at me. He doesn't see how dangerous it is for him to be alone." But her theatrics no longer sounded like care. They sounded like panic. Then the judge turned to me. I rose slowly, gripping the wooden rail for balance, my legs steady, though my heart worked harder than it should. I looked directly at him, then at the room, and finally at David. "Your Honor," I said, my voice clear, "I may be old, my body may fail, but my mind is mine. What happened that night was not care, it was cruelty. I begged for help. The door stayed locked. If strangers hadn't found me, I would not be standing here today. That's not protection, that's abandonment." The judge listened intently, his eyes never leaving mine. Then he asked the question that hung over everything. "David Harris, do you believe your father is incapable of handling his own affairs?" The entire courtroom held its breath. Melissa's hand gripped his arm like a vice, her nails digging into his sleeve, urging him to repeat the lie. David swallowed hard, his lips trembling. Finally, he whispered, "No." The word dropped like thunder. Melissa's head snapped toward him, her face twisted with rage, but it was too late. He repeated louder this time, "No, he's not incapable." "He's more lucid than I've ever seen him." His voice cracked, but the truth was undeniable. The judge set down his pen and spoke with finality. "The petition is denied. All guardianship requests are dismissed. Furthermore, given the testimony presented, this court finds cause to open an inquiry into possible elder abuse." His gavel struck once, sharp as lightning, and it was over. As I walked out of the courtroom, Clara smiled for the first time in days. "You didn't just survive," she said. "You won." But I didn't feel like I had won. I felt like I had endured. Because when your own son turns his back on you, even the sweetest victory leaves a bitter taste. And as I stood on the courthouse steps, the rain easing into silence, I wondered what Melissa would do now that the law had stripped her of her power. Melissa did not vanish after the judge's gavel fell. If anything, she grew louder in defeat. Within days, whispers trickled back to me from neighbors and even strangers, stories Melissa had planted, twisting the truth. She told anyone who would listen that I had lied under oath, that Clara had brainwashed me, that Mrs. Carter was senile, that Daniel had fabricated everything for money. Her words crawled through the community like poison ivy, trying to choke whatever respect I still had left. I should have expected it. Some people lose gracefully. Melissa was not one of them. What she couldn't win in court, she would try to win with rumor. And standing beside her in those whispers was David, not speaking much, but never correcting her either. That silence again. That silence that had almost killed me. One evening, as I sat at my apartment desk, I received an envelope slipped under my door. No name on the outside, only the word "Truth," scrawled in shaky handwriting. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper. The words were jagged, messy, written with the kind of hand that shakes under guilt. It was David. "Dad, I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to fight her, but I want you to know I didn't agree with what she did that night. I froze. I was weak. I'll regret it until my last breath." I stared at the page until my eyes blurred. Regret. It was a word that offered no comfort, only reminder. He regretted, but he hadn't stopped her. He regretted, but he hadn't opened the door. Still, I folded the paper carefully, placing it in the same drawer where I kept Melissa's threats and my deeds. Proof of betrayal, proof of weakness, proof of truth. The next day, Clara came by with news. "The inquiry into elder abuse is moving forward," she said. "Melissa could face charges if she keeps pushing. You should prepare yourself for more backlash." I nodded, though I already knew. People like Melissa don't stop until they're forced, and if the law had to be that force, so be it. That night, I returned to my notebook, the one Margaret had once told me to use when pain grew too heavy. I wrote about David's letter, about the way regret feels like a bandage too thin to cover a wound that still bleeds. I wrote about Melissa's whispers, about how a lie spreads faster than truth, but never grows roots. And I wrote a line that steadied my shaking hands. The truth is patient. It always outlives the lie. As I closed the notebook, a sudden quiet settled over me. Not the silence of betrayal, but the silence of preparation. Because deep down, I knew Melissa hadn't played her last card. And when she did, I would be ready to remind her that the man she tried to lock out at midnight had already built a door she could never close again. Chapter 15 began not with another knock at my door, but with silence that felt too deliberate to ignore. After the storm of court dates and whispered lies, Melissa's voice vanished from the streets. No new rumors. No sudden visits. No angry letters. For days, nothing. And in that nothing, I felt the most dangerous kind of threat. The quiet before something heavy drops. I sat by the window of my small apartment, the city moving below me with ordinary rhythm, yet my mind refused to rest. People like Melissa don't simply accept defeat. They regroup. They sharpen their blades in the dark. I thought back to Margaret, to the way she always told me, "Don't confuse peace with surrender." This wasn't peace. It was the pause of a predator. Clara called me later that week with confirmation of what I already sensed. The inquiry rattled her, she said, but it also cornered her. And when people like Melissa are cornered, they lash out, expect another move. Clara's voice was steady, but beneath it, I heard a caution she rarely showed. It wasn't just legal strategy anymore. It was personal protection. I spent that night sorting through the drawer that had become the vault of my survival. Melissa's letter, David's apology, Daniel's warning, my notebook filled with pages of memory and proof. Each piece of paper was more than ink. It was armor. If they wanted to rewrite my story, they would find every line already carved in stone. The following morning, a letter arrived by certified mail. The envelope was thick, heavy, its edges marked with the seal of a law office. My chest tightened as I tore it open. Inside was a notice. Melissa had filed for custody rights, not over me this time, but over the estate I had earmarked for my grandchildren. She was aiming not just to erase me, but to bind the next generation to her grasp. My hands shook as I read the words, not from weakness, but from the realization that her ambition had no bottom. That night, I sat at my desk, the letter spread before me, and wrote in my notebook, "When betrayal fails against the father, it will reach for the children." I closed my eyes and saw the faces of those kids, David's children, my blood, my legacy. They didn't ask for any of this. They didn't choose the war between respect and greed, but they would inherit its consequences. I swore to myself then that Melissa would never touch what I had built for them, not while I still breathed, not even after. And as the rain began to drum against the window once more, I realized the fight was no longer about me alone. It was about what kind of truth my grandchildren would grow up believing, hers or mine. I didn't sleep after reading that notice. The thought of Melissa clawing at my grandchildren's inheritance made my chest ache worse than any heart attack ever could. They were innocent, untouched by the poison she carried, and now she wanted to tighten her grip on their future the way she had tried to tighten it around mine. The next morning I called Clara. My voice shook, but not with fear, with fury. "She's going after the children now," I said. Clara's pause was brief, but heavy. "Then we'll cut her path off before she gets near them," she replied. She promised to file immediate motions to block her petition, adding new clauses that placed my estate in a trust with conditions Melissa could never reach. Hearing her calm confidence steadied me, but I knew this fight was more than legal. It was moral. Later that day, I received an unexpected visitor, Jennifer, my granddaughter. She knocked timidly, clutching a backpack and a sketchbook. Her eyes were wide, filled with the kind of confusion children carry when they hear too much but understand too little. "Grandpa," she whispered, Why is Mommy so mad at you? My heart cracked at her words. She stepped inside, looking around my small apartment, and I saw the sadness in her face. Daddy doesn't talk much anymore. Mommy says you're trying to take everything away from us. I knelt slowly, my knees aching, but I wanted to meet her at eye level. Jennifer, I said softly, what I'm trying to take away isn't yours, it's hers, and what I'm protecting, that's for you. She tilted her head, confused, but I could see she was listening. I showed her the notebook on my desk, flipping past pages she was too young to understand, until I landed on the sketch she once made for me years ago, still tucked between the sheets. See this? I kept it because it reminded me of what matters. Not money, not houses. Family. Respect. Her small hand reached out, touching the drawing. I miss you at home, she said. My throat tightened, but I forced a smile. Home isn't just a place, Jennifer. It's where love is. And as long as I'm alive, you'll always have a home with me. She nodded, hugging the sketchbook tighter against her chest. After she left, escorted quietly by a neighbor so Melissa wouldn't know where she'd gone, I sat in the silence of the room. My heart was weak, my body tired. But something inside me flared alive again. Melissa could file all the petitions she wanted, could spread every lie her tongue could form. But she had made one fatal mistake. She thought legacy was measured in property and bank accounts. She didn't understand that legacy is carried in the eyes of a child who still trusts you. I returned to my notebook that evening and wrote, if she wants to fight over inheritance, let her. I've already won the only legacy that matters. But even as I closed the book, I felt a shadow pressing at the edges of my thoughts. Melissa wasn't finished. She never would be. And the next move she made would test not just my strength, but David's silence all over again. Days passed in uneasy quiet, and that quiet was more suffocating than any storm. I knew Melissa too well by now. When her voice disappeared, it meant she was plotting. Clara confirmed it a week later with a call that made my chest tighten. She's filed an appeal, she said. This time, not about guardianship, not even just the estate. She's asking for full control over your medical decisions. The words landed like ice water down my spine. My heart, my health, my very breath. She wanted to hold it in her hands. The same woman who locked me out to die at midnight now wanted the legal right to decide whether I lived or died if another attack came. I hung up the phone and sat staring at the walls of my apartment. Memories rushed back, not just of that night on the porch, but of Margaret, of the promises we made in the hospital when she was slipping away. She had looked at me, her hand frail in mine, and whispered, protect yourself for David's sake. Don't let anyone decide for you. I had nodded back then, never imagining that the danger would come from within my own family. Clara moved quickly, filing an advance directive, notarized and ironclad, giving full authority for medical decisions only to me, and a trusted backup in case I could not speak for myself. I chose Paul, my old friend, the notary who had stood by me when others turned away. Signing those papers felt like closing the last window Melissa could crawl through. But the fight wasn't only on paper anymore. That evening, I received a call from David. His voice was ragged, broken. Dad, I didn't know she was doing this. I swear I didn't. She told me it was just about protecting the kids, about making sure you're cared for. His words stumbled over each other, the way guilt often does when it tries to dress itself as innocence. David, I said quietly, when I was dying outside your door, whose hand turned the lock? Silence stretched on the line. I could hear him breathing, could almost feel the weight of his shame pressing through the wires. Finally, he whispered, mine stayed at my side. I let her. His voice cracked, and then the line went dead. I set the phone down slowly, my heart aching in more ways than one. Regret again. Always regret, never action. My son was a man who couldn't open a door even to save his father. And now, he was a man watching his wife try to steal not just my legacy, but my very right to live. That night, I opened my notebook and wrote with a heavy hand, "Melissa wants my life in her hands. But the next time midnight comes, I will already have decided who holds the key." As I closed the book, I knew the next battle would not be fought in a courtroom alone. It would be fought in the shadows of hospital corridors, in the paperwork of emergencies, in the silence of machines. And I had to be ready, because midnight always comes again. I woke before dawn the next morning, the apartment still wrapped in shadows. My chest ached, not from illness this time, but from the heavy thought of Melissa's petition to own my breath. I brewed my coffee slowly, staring at the steam as if it might carry Margaret's voice back to me. "Don't let anyone decide for you." Her words haunted me, yet steadied me all at once. By noon, Clara called with an update. "The directive is filed, ironclad. No judge will hand Melissa power over your health. But be careful, she's rattled. People like her don't stop when paper blocks them. They strike at reputation, at the people around you." Her warning lingered long after the call ended, and she was right. That very evening, Mrs. Carter knocked at my door. She looked troubled, her hands wringing the strap of her purse. "I thought you should know," she said softly. "Melissa's been coming around the neighborhood. She's telling folks you've lost your mind, that you're unstable, dangerous even. She told the Thompsons you hallucinate, told the grocer you screamed at her in public. None of it's true, but she's planting seeds." My chest tightened, but I managed a tired smile. "Thank you, Eleanor," I said, using her first name for the first time in years. Truth takes longer to grow than lies, but its roots are deeper. After she left, I pulled out my notebook and wrote down every rumor, every falsehood. Not because I needed the record for myself, but because someday my grandchildren might. One day, when they're older, I want them to see the truth in my own hand, not Melissa's poisoned version of it. 2 nights later, another knock came. This time, when I opened the door, it wasn't Mrs. Carter. It was David. He stood there in the dim light, face pale, eyes hollow. He looked more like a boy than the man he was supposed to be. "Dad," he said, voice cracking, "I don't know how much longer I can do this." He stepped inside without waiting for me to answer. His hands trembled as he spoke. "She's furious since the hearing. She doesn't sleep. She talks about you constantly. She blames you for everything, our money troubles, our fights, even the kids' nightmares. I don't know how to stop her." I watched him, my son, broken but still tethered to the woman who had tried to bury me alive in silence. "You stop her," I said quietly, "by standing up once in your life. Not for me, for yourself, for your children." His eyes glistened, but he shook his head. "You don't understand, Dad. If I go against her, I lose everything." I leaned closer, my voice steady. "No, David. You already lost everything when you chose silence over your father's life." He looked away, tears brimming but refusing to fall. For a moment, he seemed ready to speak, ready to break free. But then he turned and left, the door clicking shut behind him. I sat back down at the table, the silence pressing heavy. My son was drowning, but he still clung to the hand pulling him under. And I knew then, Melissa's next move would not just be legal. It would be personal, and when it came, it would decide not only my fate, but David's as well. The call came early in the morning, just as the sun was pushing pale light through my curtains. It wasn't Clara this time, or Mrs. Carter, or even David. It was an officer from the local police department. His voice was steady, professional, but I could hear the discomfort behind it. "Mr. Harris," he said, "we've had a complaint filed against you. Your daughter-in-law alleges you've been harassing her and creating a dangerous environment for her children. We're obligated to follow up." For a long moment, I couldn't even answer. Harassing? Dangerous? My body was frail, my heart fragile, and yet somehow Melissa had managed to twist the story until I was the villain in my own family. When I finally spoke, my voice shook. Not from fear, but from disbelief. "Officer, the only danger here is the silence of a locked door." He didn't argue. He simply said he had to come by and make a report. When he arrived later that morning, I handed him everything: Melissa's letter, David's apology, Daniel's testimony, Mrs. Carter's account. I showed him the drawer filled with documents, each one proof that I had been the one under attack, not them. He listened carefully, his pen scratching across the paper. "Mr. Harris," he said at last, "I believe you, but people like her, they know how to use the system. You need to be prepared for more of this." After he left, I sat at the table staring at the folder of papers spread before me. Melissa wasn't just trying to take my property, my health, or my legacy. Now she was trying to stain my name, to carve into the world's memory an image of me that wasn't real. That was her weapon now. Not the law, but reputation. And I knew how quickly lies could spread once planted. That evening, Clara came by in person, her expression grim but determined. "She's playing her last cards," she said. "If she can't control your money or your health, she'll try to destroy your credibility. But the inquiry into elder abuse is still alive, and now this false complaint only strengthens your case. It shows her desperation." She looked me square in the eye. "But Bernard, you need to brace yourself. This won't just hurt in the courts. It will hurt in your community." Her words proved true sooner than I wanted. The next day, when I walked to the corner store, I felt eyes linger on me longer than usual. Whispers trailed behind my back. Some nodded politely, but others turned away. Melissa's poison was spreading. That night, I returned to my notebook. My hands trembled as I wrote. "She thinks she can erase me by rewriting who I am, but paper, ink, and truth will outlast her whispers." I underlined the words twice, pressing the pen so hard it nearly tore the page, and as I closed the book, I realized something. The battle had shifted. No longer just about survival, no longer just about inheritance. It had become about the one thing I had left to give my grandchildren, the truth of who their grandfather really was. And I knew then, the only way to protect that truth was to prepare for the day Melissa's lies collided head-on with the evidence she could never silence. The collision came sooner than I thought. A week after the officer's visit, Clara called me with a tightness in her voice I had never heard before. "Bernard," she said, "the inquiry board has scheduled a formal hearing. They want to review both the abuse allegations against Melissa and the complaint she filed against you. Same room, same day. It's going to be war." I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles ached. "So she'll be there," I muttered. Clara's pause was brief but heavy. "Yes. And David, too. This is the moment where everything will come into the light." That night, I barely touched my dinner. I sat at the table with my notebook open, flipping through pages of my own handwriting. Proof that my mind was still sharp. Proof that my memory was intact. Proof that no matter how many lies Melissa whispered, my truth was already carved. I thought of Margaret, how she used to tell me, "Write it down so they can't deny it later." I whispered into the empty room. "I wrote it down, Maggie. I wrote it all." The day of the hearing, the courthouse hallway smelled of coffee and nerves. When Melissa walked in, she carried herself like a queen, chin high, lips pressed into that thin smile she wore when she thought victory was close. David followed, looking worn, his shoulders slouched as though gravity itself had doubled its pull on him. For a moment, our eyes met, and I saw something flicker in his. Fear, yes, but also longing. Longing for this to end. Perhaps, or for the boy he once was to resurface. Inside the chamber, the board members sat in a row, their expressions unreadable. Melissa spoke first, her voice smooth as silk, rehearsed. She painted herself as a victim, a dutiful daughter-in-law harassed by an unstable old man. She called me paranoid, manipulative, dangerous. Every word she spoke was a knife, but I let her finish, let her tangle herself in her own performance. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly, my hand steady on the table, and laid my notebook down in front of the panel. "You want to know if my mind is clear?" I said. "Read this. Page after page of dates, details, names. The night I collapsed on my own porch. The voices I heard inside. The neighbors who found me. The threats, the letters, the lies. Every word written by my hand. This is not the handwriting of a confused man. This is the testimony of a father locked out by his own family." Clara added her evidence. The legal filings, the notarized protections, the false complaint Melissa had lodged against me. Piece by piece, the story became undeniable. The whispers Melissa had spread crumbled under the weight of documented truth. When the panel questioned David, the room held its breath. He shifted, glanced at Melissa, then at me. His lips trembled. I stayed silent when my father needed me most," he whispered. "But he's not confused. He's not dangerous. He's the one telling the truth." Melissa's face turned pale, her mask shattering. For the first time, she had no words. The board recessed, their decision to be announced in days. As I left the courthouse, my chest ached, not from weakness, but from release. For the first time since that night on the porch, I felt the weight lifting, just a little. But I also knew Melissa. Defeat in that room didn't mean the war was over, and as I stepped into the fading daylight, I wondered how far she would go once she realized even her own husband had turned against her. The inquiry ended, but the story didn't leave me. I still wake sometimes in the middle of the night, the phantom sound of my fists tapping weakly against that locked door echoing through the room. Midnight has a way of staying with you. A scar carved into your chest no doctor can heal. Melissa no longer visits me, no longer dares to file another petition. The inquiry found enough evidence to open a case against her, and though I may never see her behind bars, the truth is finally written in places she cannot erase. Clara told me, sometimes justice isn't about punishment, it's about exposure. And that exposure was enough. Her whispers lost their power the moment David's voice cracked in that chamber, admitting I was telling the truth. David still doesn't come often. When he does, his visits are brief, quiet, filled with the awkwardness of a man who knows his silence nearly killed his father. I don't hate him. Hate is too heavy for a heart already scarred. But I no longer carry illusions either. He has to walk his own road now, whether or not he ever finds his way back. What I hold on to instead are the smaller things. My granddaughter Jennifer still sneaks drawings into my mailbox. She drew me once sitting in a chair with a cup of coffee, smiling, while the house behind me stood tall. In the corner she wrote 3 words in her crooked handwriting. "Still here, Grandpa." I taped it to my wall. Every morning, when I see it, I remind myself that survival is its own kind of revenge. I keep my notebook close too. Page after page of betrayal, but also page after page of proof that I endured. One day, when I am gone, they will read it. Not just my children or grandchildren, but anyone who needs to know what dignity looks like when tested. And maybe they will understand that old men are not fragile paper you can tear, but steel you cannot bend. So this is my closing. Not a happy ending, not the fairy tale where family gathers back around the table, but an honest one. I am still standing. My story is still mine. They tried to lock me out at midnight, and maybe one day midnight will come for me again. But when it does, I will not be knocking on their door. I will be walking through my own, unafraid, unashamed, and unbroken.